It's a fantasy.
Oh, I got it. Okay. All right. You don't have a bunch of art cards there. All right.
I don't have who?
You don't have a bunch of art cards.
Art cards. I do not
Yeah,
have.
I mean, art cards are almost like collector's items now because we don't send out cards and, except on great occasions. So
Yeah,
there
it's
are,
just
right,
right.
there aren't as many things to like stick up. Okay, I'm happy.
Is it distracting? Should I like?
No. You've got nice light behind you. That's good.
Oh, okay, cool. Thanks. I'm in a trailer, 1967.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Are you recording now?
I am.
Welcome, everybody. I just want to let you know that this is being recorded. So if you prefer not any part of yourself to be recorded, just know that that's happening. I am Michelle Guthrie from the class of 2018 with a major in sculpture and minor in art and ecology. And I, with my companion in crime, Ivy Loveborough, have been organizing these Alumni Connections, and I'm really so grateful to have you all here to welcome our very special guests. Oops, I've lost myself here. There we go. Where'd I go? Just want to pull up. So our guest today is Melanie Stevens, an artist, illustrator, and writer. Ms. Stevens' work examines flawed narratives of the African diaspora that often have a history of appropriation and erasure. Through her work, she reimagines and reappropriates versions of narratives which center a nuanced and often ignored humanity. She is the creator of the graphic novel series WaterShed and the co-founder and editor of Miss Anthology, an organization that supports and publishes racially and economically diverse young comic artists who identify as female or genderqueer. She is also the co-creator and curator of Nat Turner Project, a migratory gallery space that grants artists of color the freedom to create or express their own language within or without the parameters of racial commodification or designation. She received her Bachelor's of Art degree for political science from Yale University and her Master's of Fine Arts degree for visual studies at Pacific Northwest College of Art, where she currently teaches as an assistant professor. Welcome, Melanie. Thank you so much for being here. Today's guest interviewer is artist designer Irene Ramirez, and she's a first generation Mexican-American artist and designer based out of Portland, Oregon. Irene grew up in Monterey Bay, California, which cultivated her great appreciation for the world of agriculture and the beautiful diversity of the natural world. For over 14 years, Irene has worked as both a chalk artist and graphic designer for various natural food grocers in the Pacific Northwest. She currently works as a freelance artist and designer, as well as a regional sign artist for New Seasons Market. Irene received her Bachelor's of Fine Arts degree from PNCA in 2019. Welcome, Irene. And now I'll take it over, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so honored to be here sharing a screen with Melanie Stevens, and excited to speak to you. First of all, my first question for you, Melanie, is, or I would love for you to introduce yourself or tell us your background, where you're from, and what brought you to PNCA.
Okay, sure. First of all, I'm excited to be talking with you as well. I originally grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and lived there after undergrad for about 15 years, doing work in customer service, as well as mid-level accounting. And then in 2015, I decided to kind of leave it all behind and come to Portland, Oregon to attend the Visual Studies graduate program at PNCA to pursue art. And this is where I've been since then. So that's kind of like my backstory, I guess.
Awesome. And I noticed that because you were studying political science before,
Mhm.
I was interested of like, when did you know you wanted to be an artist, or what triggered that for you?
I honestly have always kind of considered myself an artist. I don't know of a time when art wasn't a big part of my life. It's just always been there in some form or fashion. I pursued political science in undergrad because I still have this deep fascination with American history and the ways that it has been told and retold and shifted and appropriated and changed. So there was a deep interest in that, but to my core, I think I've always been pursuing art in some degree or fashion. It's just a matter of declaring it, I guess, that has changed over the years, and most recently, I think.
Nice. Yeah, and your art is so powerful and works as a catalyst for confronting racial and societal issues. And when we were talking last, I really loved what you said about like why you don't consider yourself an activist. And I felt like that was really important. And I would love for you to talk more about why, the difference between that for people, because I feel you on that. People think because you made something that now you're an activist. It's like, why? I'm an artist, I just made that.
Yeah.
So could you expel on that?
Yeah, I think that, there are different kinds of activist work, from, being on the ground and sort of kind of participating on the front lines to working behind the scenes and supporting the people who do that, as well as, more administrative things. I don't do any of that work. And I think it's important to kind of state that, because I think that sometimes when you create work that is political in nature, people like to convince themselves that consuming this work or commodifying it is a part of doing the work, usually kind of for their own sort of like appeasement, but it is not the work. By virtue of the body that I live in, most of the parts of my lives are political, and I create work about that because that is what I know. But I don't think that that work is necessarily the activist work. And I think it's important to kind of state that and to note it.
Beautiful. I agree. Thank you for sharing that with us. What kinds of work are you making now?
Mostly work that I can make from home, for obvious reasons. I am just like literally days ago finishing up the second volume of my graphic novel series. And I'm also doing a lot of print work as well. But a bulk of my work as of recent has been mostly through my curatorial practice with Maximiliano Martinez, who's another graduate of the same program, with Nat Turner Project, and kind of organizing relief stipend projects as well as exhibitions, and the podcast work that we're doing, which is kind of like an archival sort of practice that we're working on. So
yeah, I really loved your podcast. Who all gonna be there?
yeah.
I really love the introduction also. Did you guys make that up? Who made that?
Yeah, it's a kind of a long running joke, like a pop cultural joke, making fun of an Alicia Keys video. So we sort of like took that and spun it for like the art world, in terms of like chasing someone down to get them to go to your art opening or whatever. So yeah.
I also felt some like resonance of the Jill Scott intro, where it's like, hello, you there? And I really like how you and Max play off each other. How did you guys really meet in a coffee shop? How did you meet each other?
We met in the Visual Studies graduate program.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, in 2015.
Okay. And for those of us or folks that don't know about the Nat Turner Project? Do you want to kind of speak more to that? Because
Yeah, sure. So we were cohorts in the visual studies program, and it was kind of a common frustration that as we were both kind of creating work around race and positionality, that there wasn't the same level of like rigor and nuance and care in regards to critiquing the work. We kind of often had to kind of find our own way and go outside of like, you know, outside of like the school walls into the community to find like people who could give us like more rigorous critique. So we sort of applied that to the experiences of, you know, all POC students, and we decided to create an art space in the bathrooms of the graduate studios. And in the beginning, it was just kind of like we'd ask other, you know, cohort and friends to display their work, and we'd front the bill for like press and, you know, snacks for the openings. And it kind of evolved out of the bathrooms into like gallery spaces, some traditional, some non-traditional, and then out into the communities like St. John's and Paragon Gallery. And it's kind of expanded from like a curatorial project into more kind of like community work as well. And I think a lot of it stemmed from this need to kind of build community. And it's just kind of, everything has grown from that.
yeah, and talking about community, I can imagine if you came from Atlanta to Portland, that had to be, did you feel any type of culture shock from that kind of difference? I know that living in Portland for me has been interesting. I'm from California, so I feel like I'm used to having a lot more diversity, and even being a student at PNCA and feeling like, oh, where's my community at? That can get a little hard here sometimes.
Yeah.
So what was your experience with that, or how did you start meeting people? Was it just from school?
Well, Atlanta was actually, I wouldn't say Atlanta was more diverse. It was in a lot of ways similar to Portland, except I just was more surrounded by Black people. And coming here, it was a complete sort of like shift in the opposite direction. And that was a little bit of a culture shock, but one that I was prepared for because I knew, you know, about Portland. Not as much as I thought I did, but I knew something. And really, I have to credit the Black faculty at PNCA in sort of helping me kind of reacclimate. Sharita Town, Jaleesa Johnston, who sort of helped me kind of find people in the Portland community who could talk to me about the work that I was doing, who could give me recommendations, or just like good people to know and to hang out with. And that's how I began building community in Portland, mostly. So it was a pretty seamless transition, honestly, all things considered.
Wonderful, awesome. Yeah, and now you're a professor, assistant professor at PNCA. Awesome. Yeah. How does that feel like to you now, being on the other side of the class?
It's sometimes a bit surreal. It's a little strange, but also really, really inspiring to have the privilege of seeing these young artists evolve and how they kind of utilize their ideas about the world. I think ultimately it's a gift, and it inspires me as an artist. It informs my pedagogy, and I really rather enjoy it. So
nice. I personally loved seeing you on campus when I got to be there. What advice do you have to future alumni or of your program, or, you know, what have you learned since graduating that maybe could have helped, you at the beginning that you could give some advice to students?
The advice that I would offer is something I often think about, what I would tell my like 17-year-old self as I matriculated in undergrad, woefully unprepared. The advice I would offer is to always remember that education is a gift and a privilege, and you get out of it what you give to it. It is a tool, and it is within your own agency to take advantage of every resource and every tool within that box. And if you don't, you're going to regret it, because ultimately you're the one who's paying for this.
Yeah.
So I think that would be my biggest advice. So get to know all of your faculty members, make those connections, use all of the resources, all of the facilities. And I did actually get to do that as a graduate student because I was much older and I knew what I was like getting. So yeah, to do that like at a younger age would be absolutely, you'd be absolutely unstoppable, I think.
Speaking of unstoppable, following all the work you do, I'm like, when do you sleep? Like you do so, I love how you start your podcast too. And you're like, well, this week I'm painting street signs, you know, like being an artist and having many hats can be exhausting. And so sometimes I listen to what's going on with you and I'm like, how is she still standing? The energy is incredible. So do you have a really great self-care routine or?
I mean, I have to out of necessity. I think that every kind of artist within the Portland community wears about 12 different hats. That's just the culture here. Mm-hmm. And you have to approach self-care and kind of like monitoring your own health as another job. Like you have to build that into your schedule. Otherwise you will burn out. And I have a couple of times throughout the years. And it's just something you learn how to implement into your routine. You have to. It's absolutely necessary and integral for survival, really.
Right. And having, you know, seen the different hats you wear, I was curious if you could pick one hat, what hat do you really want to wear, like mostly?
Oh, that's hard.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna cheat a little bit and say it's a tie. I do love the hat of artist. I mean, I have to. I mean, I'm going to be an artist no matter what. Even when I was doing forensic accounting, I was making art on nights and weekends. I just never slept. So no matter what happens, I'm just always going to be an artist. But I also really, really have enjoyed this kind of curatorial practice that I've built with Maximiliano, and what we've been able to do over the years. And I think that in turn has kind of made me a better artist as well. So they're linked, they're, you know, a part of each other. And I think they're both important.
Yeah. What has been your biggest lesson in creating the Nat Turner Project?
The biggest lesson has been the burden of taking on the mantle of creating safe spaces. We had an incredible amount of hubris in the beginning of being able to do this, and different circumstances quickly kind of knocked us on our ass and made us realize that, you know, if we're going to say that we're doing this, these are the steps we need to take. And we also need to recognize that no space is 100% safe, just not within the construct of the world that we live in. But we can try to get as close to that as possible, and that we have to do our due diligence. And it made us really humble over the years. So
nice. Awesome. Totally different track here, but I was also curious of exactly like who or what kind of art do you feel like most inspired by?
Yeah, I saw this question and I always like panic a little bit about this question, because for me, like the change, like it's always fluctuating. There's no given answer on any given day. But I think like the overriding or overall commonality of all of the artists that I enjoy are the artists who are doing work that sort of illuminate conversations that are happening, but don't necessarily invite everyone to participate in those conversations. Like artists who play with legibility, but also sort of, they kind of light the way for worlds, for interior worlds that are already existing, already have been existing. So I think a lot about David Hammond's work, Octavia Butler, Christina Sharp and her wake work, but then also, you know, people I know who just happen to be brilliant artists. Sharita Town, I've mentioned, like the work that she's doing around Black geographies. Darius Carter, who now lives in the US, in the Midwest, but was Portland based for a long time. And his writing around like pop culture and Black interiority is just breathtaking and beautiful. And then Ashley Stone Myers, who does a lot of like really beautiful critical art writing as well. So like all of these people kind of inspire me. So yeah.
Yeah, you have this like pop culture. I like how you integrate it within your work, and it definitely seems to inspire some of the stuff you do and the commentary you have on it. And I wonder, like, how do you keep a pulse on pop culture? Because you're really good at it. And I'm like, what site are you on that you keep up with all of this stuff going on? It's incredible.
Well, you know, a couple of things. I am surrounded by brilliant people who stay on top of the pulse of whatever's happening, just brilliant artists. So you're always kind of going to be in the know by virtue of being around certain people. But also, you know, I have a deep interest in pop culture and the ways that we use that as a marker in our daily existence. So, you know, I spend time, you know, every day kind of scouring, you know, the archives and Twitter and like where a lot of these conversations are happening, because it's interesting to me and it doesn't feel like work. So I guess that's a part of it. And
Yeah.
there are some really beautiful, nuanced, ugly, detailed, just fascinating conversations happening just behind the scenes. And it's just really nice to be a part of those conversations.
Is that what like spurred you to create these podcasts?
A little bit, yes. There's a really interesting tradition around Black podcasting that's been like bubbling over in the last decade or so. And, you know, I thought it would be kind of a fun little project to kind of throw my hat in the ring a little bit with that. Just in terms of, again, that Black interiority and those conversations that kind of happen behind closed doors, but, you know, you kind of don't really get access to because of society and code switching and all of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, we're getting a question of what is the who all in it, or who gonna be there and who all.
No, it's who all gonna be there.
Yeah,
who all gonna be there. I will link to it in the chat. It's on all major podcast platforms, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud. So.
Do you do that straight from where you're sitting?
Since COVID, yes. But we recently got a recording studio space at Pica. So we'll be recording from there moving forward.
Nice.
Yeah.
And having listened from the beginning of the podcast and hearing you guys kind of figure out the kinks and like what works and doesn't work, what was your biggest lesson in that project?
That's a hard one because I think we're still learning lessons. But I guess the biggest lesson is so far is to sort of let those awkward moments stand. Because I think within like the organic flow of a conversation, they make things more interesting, and trying to edit that stuff out, I think is counterproductive to what we want out of a podcast. Like, we want it to feel like a natural conversation. And I think over time, it's starting to feel more and more like that, rather than some sort of like pre-recording of canned questions that we sent our guests or whatever. We're still learning how to bring in like new people outside of our circle, because we're like really conscious of that. We don't want it to be this thing where we just keep inviting our friends over and over again. So we're starting to branch out and ask people, that aren't necessarily from Portland, or who are, in industries that we may not necessarily be well acquainted with. We just had someone from Black Feast who does like culinary art. We did an interview early on with the Portland Antifa, and that one was interesting. So yeah, just continuing to branch out and bring in different voices that are, maybe not necessarily so close to our own perspectives, I think would make things more interesting.
Nice. Yeah, it's very reaffirming how you guys just speak so candidly. Is it edited at all? Because it doesn't sound edited.
Yeah, our running joke is we edit it so that people can keep their jobs.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it has an easy flow. I feel like you guys are funny. It's interesting. You have great topics. I'm curious, like, where do you see that going? You just want to keep putting it out there, and
yeah, that's the plan. Keep
or offshoots stuff.
I don't know. 2 is a lot already.
Yeah.
So maybe if more people come in, they can do offshoots. We'd be open to that as well. But we want to keep, inviting guests, and like, we want those guests to be like more and more well known. That would be pretty cool. So we're starting to like extend our branches a little bit further. So
yeah, speaking with you, it's so nice I feel like you have such an easy way of speaking. And even, forgive me, everybody, because I, of course, made like a list of questions, because I get really nervous talking in front of people. So it's harder for me to be off the cuff. But I feel like you when I talked to you earlier, you're like, I'm totally happy with like whatever you want. I feel like you have this like very courageous spirit of being like, let's talk about everything. Like, where did that come from with you?
If I'm being honest, I would have to say that a lot of that came from like critique culture in graduate school.
Were you crying in the bathroom?
I wasn't the one that cried in the bathroom, but that did happen a few times. No, it's just one thing I think that the PNCA Visual Studies program taught me was how to speak candidly about my work, but also how to talk about other people's work, and how to elicit information from them, and phrase questions in such a way that it hits without being offensive, or coaxes information that they wouldn't necessarily be forthcoming with. Like, critique culture taught me that pretty well. And I sort of applied that to, public speaking, and then the podcast. So it's all been kind of this organic shift, because pre-grad school, I was never comfortable speaking in large groups, but it's just something you kind of learn to do. It's part of the toolbox that they give you.
Yeah. And with that, like, I know personally, I had a hard time being at PNCA, being one of a few people of color at the school.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I felt underrepresented within my classes, and I struggled with that a little bit. How do you feel? Like, I can't imagine being one of the few like professors of color at PNCA. Like, how does that feel to you?
Well, as I've alluded to, I feel like I'm in great company. The Black professors that I've known here have been brilliant and just breathtaking, and they leave very large shoes to fill. It almost feels impossible. But also I feel that there's a certain responsibility, for better or worse, of being like for many of these students, the only Black professor that they will come into contact with throughout their entire like undergraduate career. And as such, I try to include in my pedagogy this idea and this understanding of art as, you know, a political thing, as well as kind of deep read and deep understanding of media, and the responsibility of my students as creators of said media to think about their positionality, no matter what it is, to think about the materials they're using, and the politics of that, and to think about what it is they want their work to do. And I think a lot of that is based on my own personal positionality. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. When we were speaking about this, you made a good point, because I was saying how I know that our school has a hard time with this, and it's complicated, but you did bring up this issue where it's not just PNCA.
No.
Like it's every major university, and it's systemic in that, yeah, sure, you just might not get as many Black professors,
Yeah,
because of the way education is set up. So that was really refreshing to hear you say, and to be reminded of that. This is just, it's, you know, PNCA for me was a little microcosm of what happens in Portland itself, and it can feel a little daunting. And especially in this last year, it's been really hard to watch, but also really affirming to watch people stand up and say, you know, I've had enough of this. So I guess where my question is going, like, how do you see everything, the destruction of things coming down? Do you feel like we will be able to revive the city with our work and our compassion of understanding of what's going on? Because I personally feel a little doomsday half the time about everything, and I'm like, oh, I hope we can figure out a way. And I remember, Michelle, on our last call, you were like, how do you think we can make things better through art? And I was like, wow, that's a really hard question. But I mean, even this platform, even you doing your podcast, even you speaking up, and having the courage to be yourself, and doing it so beautifully, gives other people courage. Sorry, I'm kind of like all over the place here, but do you see the school like being able to be a place for us to really ignite some of that fire? Like,
well, I mean, I think that contemporary American history has a rich like tradition of colleges and universities being these incubators for like political upheaval and political involvement. So definitely, I mean, PNCA is as good as any other educational institution for being in place for something like that. Again, because education at this level, you know, the tools are there, the resources are all there. It's just a matter of someone kind of taking them up and applying them in a certain way.
right. Awesome. Well, on a different note, I was curious about, like, so when you're not, you know, working all the time, what do you like to create when you're like not, right?
Yeah. What do I like to, like, just for funsies? Well, I have this really new, like relatively new and deep love for printmaking. And over, you know, this seemingly never-ending quarantine period, I have kind of built this at-home printmaking practice, and I've fallen in love with like liner cuts, and like making work that's referring to, you know, current events in that way, and also printing on fabric. So I'm doing that a lot when I'm not teaching, which hasn't been often lately, but I'm really into kind of this printmaking at home process, as kind of like a call and response to current events, and these upheavals that are happening right now. So
Nice. So that's what you're creating for fun, for
Yeah.
funsies?
For funsies.
I was curious about if you're watching this, it's too late.
Yes.
Are you going to have another showing of that?
Yes, I was actually in the IPRC BIPOC residency, and the plan was each time I extend about 40 feet to it, and I make a new set of like swatches to stitch onto this long piece of patchwork. But because of COVID, that got postponed. So hopefully over the next year or so, I will find another venue in order to add another 40 feet. It's currently, I think, 150 feet long, so that would put it almost at 200 feet to display in said venue.
Yeah, for the people watching it that maybe have no idea what it is, do you want to?
I'll include a link to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And I know that Ivy did have a question for you. Ivy, did you want to ask your question?
I think I'd just love to see any images of Melanie's work. So if you can link to, I don't know if you have a personal web page or anything like that.
I do.
Yeah. I just remember when I was a student at PNC, I subbed for Emily's class, you and Maximiliano, actually, the two of you. And I do remember something that, I don't know if it was part of your thesis presentation, but it was an obituary page.
Yeah.
So I think you know what I'm talking about. And I don't know if you could, is that on your
Yeah.
personal website?
Yeah, I'll share the link to that as well.
Okay. I think that's one of the most, I have to say, going to galleries and seeing artwork and seeing thesis projects and all that stuff, sometimes things blur together a little bit, but that particular piece, it's one of the most unforgettable single pieces of work that I've ever seen. And so anybody that's in this conversation today, please check this out. I'm getting a little choked up actually right now, just thinking about it. So, and I can be a little jaded and cynical about art. So I just want to say thanks for making that. And if you haven't seen it, group that is here with us today, you need to check that thing out. It is so powerful. So that's all. I just want to, and I'm glad that you're sharing these links. That's really all I wanted, is that people will go and visit and look at your work.
Yeah, for that, if they come in the morning, read the newspaper piece, I think that was a breakthrough for me in grad school, because it revealed all of this possibility in the use of speculative fiction to reveal these truths that society often hides. And I think I've been kind of chasing that same sort of hypothesis in every work ever since that, to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wonder if we could get some of your fancy technicians. They should really make a video of it, put it on YouTube, because I don't know when we're coming out of this right now. And I think this might be a good time to open up if anybody else has any questions for Melanie.
Hey, Melanie. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the community engagement stuff you're doing with the Nat Turner Project. I'd love to know more about it.
Sure. So right now we just finished the 5th round of the relief program, in which we partnered with Sharita Town of a Black Art Ecology of Portland in order to disperse stipends of $200 to BIPOC artists in Portland. So we've done it 5 times, and so far have raised a total of, including last year, about $40,000 through just fundraising and generous donors in the Portland arts community. And the thing about this relief stipends is we wanted to make it as accessible and as easy as possible. That's often kind of a common thing with our applications for all of our programs, because we're woefully aware as artists ourselves of how difficult a lot of these grant and fellowship programs make things for people who have limited access. So the application was just kind of this quick Google form that can be filled out in 5 minutes. And yeah, we were just able to give people money very quickly. Like the applications would close on like a Monday and we'd have dispersed them all by Wednesday. I mean, we did that 5 times.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Questions? Everybody's feeling shy today.
I have a question. Hi, I'm not very Zoom ready right now, but I'll turn my camera off. My question is around, it seems like a lot of the different projects you've worked on bring together like very digital now technological like pop culture, but then like reprocess it through handmade and like very tactile sort of techniques. And also I'm so excited to hear that you're hooked on printmaking. Welcome. Welcome to our cult of printmakers. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about how that has operated in your work and why that's interesting to you?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the ways that we process information now is very digital, right? Just this endless scroll of information coming at you all the time at any given moment. But I don't know if there's a lot of space to actually sit with it and really process it. So a lot of this retranslation for me is like within the process, for instance, with the patchwork of stitching these moments together and like the time that it takes to do that. And then even the accrual of these images over time and how the meanings of each of these images changes. Like there are things in that patchwork that meant something when I made them and they mean something completely different, so, often problematic now that they didn't in the moment. And I like to build in like moments to sit with the work, but also within my processing of the work as well. So I think that's my attraction to like the kind of the craft of it in this retranslation.
Kind of like freezing memes in time and then like revisiting them. That's really, yeah, especially as we're like, go, forward, more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, since that might be questions there. Is Megan still talking?
No.
Oh, okay. I was curious, because man, you were busy. You were teaching, you were making all the time. How have you been doing within this? Like, you're keeping busy, so that's good. But how do you feel about our pandemic lifestyle? I feel like it's always good for us to talk about this in context in case people watch this later. And yeah, I'm just curious about how you're doing.
Well, it changes from day to day. You know, most of the time, I feel like for me, the sort of staying busy is kind of a numbing effect, so that I don't have to actually think about the things that are happening. But I do feel that at some point, if and when we sort of come out of this haze, I will have to sit with the heaviness of what has been lost. And I'm not particularly thrilled about that. So there's that. But in the meantime, I can make art and I can teach things. So that's always nice.
Yeah. And definitely helps with processing. I feel like I could see that in your craft your work, where you're, like you said, you're what it means to you now, you're just creating, pumping out. Later, maybe like a journal even. Like maybe later you'll sit down and read it. all at once. Does anyone else have a question here?
You got any good speculative fiction book recs?
Oh, I mean, Octavia Butler.
Did you read Parable of
Obviously.
the Sower? Obviously.
Actually, I have not read Parable of the Sower because I actually was going to read it right before all of this started, March of 2020, and then someone told me I should wait on that. So I've been holding it.
I would concur. I read two of them and I was like, I think I need to wait.
Yeah, I read it during this time. It's funny, I had the book for like 8 years, and then I was like, whoa, at home so much, I should read this book. And then I was like, oh God, it's so good. And for those of you who don't know, Octavia Butler is sci-fi writer of the 1980s, one of the only Black women that wrote this book and she really predicted a lot of what we're into right now. And taking that in and seeing how this might build and where we might go, I feel like if we really don't have the courage to stand up and like start making some real changes, then we might end up in one of her books in real life. So I highly recommend everyone to read that book for sure. Okay. So I'm trying to catch up on everyone's comments. Well, I personally would love to thank you so much for your time. I know you have a busy schedule, and I am so honored to be a part of this project. And I really look forward to seeing like more of your work. I really look forward to seeing you again in person, seeing your work live. And even still, I think you guys should curate some of what you got going on so that we could see it in the digital world. Because on top of your podcasts, everything you're doing digitally, kudos, you deserve all the flowers. Yeah, I'm a big fan. So if I sound like I'm mumbling, I'm sorry. But yeah, thank you guys. Anybody else have anything they want to add?
I just want to say thanks so much to both of you. And for those of you that are here, come again. Melanie will be here again as the interviewer for our next session. So we're not sure yet who the guest artist will be, but we have some ideas. We need to collaborate with her about that as well. So come and share your ideas. And please, if any of you have artists that you would like to see here, alumni, please get in contact with Ivy or with me. Thanks.
I would like to say something to Melanie. Thank you so much. In my age group of artists and other people, we're not on the street. I mean, we're not out very much. You know, we're inside, and we don't know. I mean, we really don't know often what's going on in younger groups on the street, what's happening and how politics are going and how people are pushing things along. So I can tell other people I know that are also not out there what you're doing and tell them to look. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think V, did you have a question?
V, you're muted.
It's a question that I need more than 6 minutes to have Melanie answer. I apologize. Mel, I oftentimes feel like you feel where I enter spaces that are not safe for anybody. And I often find that my body has to be the first safe space for myself. But I'm wondering, just in your experience, you know, and again, we can follow up, but how do you garner that sense of safety in this community that oftentimes was not designed for us to flourish? No, explicitly not designed for us to flourish.
Right.
How do you find safety and the sense of flourishing?
That is a good question, a big one.
Sorry,
I would say that, I mean, unfortunately, as is the way, in order to kind of build a safe space for oneself as a person who is marginalized, as a person who by design of this world is not meant to be seen, as, a fully realized human being, you kind of have to learn the language. You have to learn how to navigate. You have to learn how to self-protect. And in that way, I guess I have become very good at utilizing the tools of that same sort of like oppression in order to kind of build a wall or a mask around myself. I mean, that's just been a necessity of living in this society. There are pitfalls to that, as I'm sure you're well aware of. But I guess that for me is the easiest way to do it. But also to in building that insulation, you also have to build spaces with people in which you don't have to insulate in that way. I think that's a big part of it as well, just as important, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, Mel.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your work and lived experience. You've transformed our community. Thank you so much for your support.
Great. Thank you for that good question, V. Yeah. Well, I think we're at time, so I'm not sure if I'm supposed to wrap this up. But would you like me to, Michelle? All right, so we're wrapping it up. Melanie, thank you so much for your time. Everybody who came and joined us, there will be more to come. Check out your PNCA Alumni Connections. We're here for you. Thank you again for having me participate. It was a real joy, and I loved meeting Melanie and Stephanie, and I'm so excited to see where this is going. And I cannot wait for us to all be together someday. So thank you all.
Irene, can I just say, for somebody who's uncomfortable speaking, you did an amazing job.
Thank you. I'm gonna go cry after this, but thank you so much. Melanie, thank you for I feel really inspired after speaking with you and being like, you know what, you just have to get out there and say what you have to say, whether it's wrong or whether you're saying it right or wrong. Just say, stand up. So I really appreciate it. And what you're doing with Nat Turner Project, especially, I'm so excited to see what else you got coming. And I will keep listening to your podcasts, as I think all of you should join. I'll see you guys there. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everybody. Thank you to our beautiful speakers.
Thank you.